Captain Underpants and the Big Bad Battle of the Bionic Booger Boy. Part 1. The Night of the Nasty Nostril Nuggets. The 6th epic novel by Dav Pilkey. Hi everybody, and welcome to another one of our disastrous misadventures. Before we get started, check out this comic book to get the full scoop on our story so far. The Awful Truth About Captain Underpants, a Treehouse Comics production. Once upon a time, there was two cool kids named George and Harold. We demand! Me too. They had a mean old principal named Mr. Krupp. Grrr! Hey, bubs! Blah, blah, blah. One time, Mr. Krupp punished George and Harold. You have to obey my orders. So they got a 3D hypno ring and hypnotized him. No way! You must obey us now. Okay. They made him think he was a superhero. You are now Captain Underpants. Yes, master. It was supposed to be a joke. Tra-la-la! But it got carried too far. I will go fight crime now. Way too far. Hey, come back here, bub! Tra-la-la! Then one day, he got attacked by a dandelion. Don't you hate it when that happens? Help! So George stole some superpower juice from a UFO. Ouchie! And gave it to him. Down the hatch. Glug, glug, glug. Suddenly, he got superpowers. Hey, I can fly now. I rule. Oh, great. Bummer. Nowadays, whenever Mr. Krupp hears anybody snap their fingers, he turns back into you-know-who. Tra-la-la! Uh-oh, not again. And the only way you can stop him is if you pour water on his head. What the? Then he turns back into Mr. Krupp. Hey, what's the big idea, bubs? So whatever you do, don't snap your fingers around Mr. Krupp, okay? The end. Chapter 1. George and Harold. This is George Beard and Harold Hutchins. George is the kid on the left with the tie and the flat top. Harold is the one on the right with the t-shirt and the bad haircut. Remember that now. George and Harold's grades in school were much like whales in the oceans. They rarely rose above sea level. Melvin Sneedley, however, he's the kid down there with the bow tie and the glasses, always got straight A's. Because Melvin was so academically gifted, people just assumed he was a lot smarter than George and Harold. But that wasn't true. You see, George and Harold were every bit as smart as the straight A students, but in a different way. In a way that couldn't be measured by quizzes or worksheets. Maybe George and Harold couldn't spell very well or remember their multiplication tables. Perhaps their grammar weren't no good neither. But when it came to saving the entire planet from the nasty forces of unrelenting evil, there was nobody better than George Beard and Harold Hutchins. It's a good thing that George and Harold were smart enough to get themselves out of trouble, because their silliness was always getting them into trouble. In fact, one time it got them into a really snotty situation. But before I can tell you that story, I have to tell you this story. Chapter 2. Squishies Part 1. It was demonstration speech day in Miss Ribble's 4th grade English class. Every student had to give an oral report demonstrating how to do something. First up were Tim Bronsky and Steve Lupner, who demonstrated how to give a speech that they hadn't prepared for. They got a D-. Next up were Jessica Gordon and Stephanie Wyckoff, who demonstrated how to cook frozen lasagna in a pop-up toaster. After the firemen left, it was George and Harold's turn. Harold carefully tacked some charts and graphs on the wall, while George brought out a large garbage can with a toilet seat taped to the top. Ladies and gentlemen, said George, today Harold and I are going to demonstrate how to do a squishy. First, you need 2 packs of ketchup and a toilet seat. Next, said Harold as he pointed to their ketchup display chart, you must fold the ketchup packs in half and carefully place them under the toilet seat. Make sure that the packs are under those front 2 bumpy thingies on the bottom of the seat. Now, once the ketchup packs are in place, said Harold, all you have to do is wait for somebody to sit down on the toilet seat. Do we have any volunteers? Come on, said George. Who wants a squishy? Although nobody in the class wanted to sit on the toilet seat, everybody wanted to see what would happen if something actually did. So George grasped one side of the toilet seat, Harold grasped the other, and they both pushed down. Splat, splat! Everyone in the class was thrilled, except for the two kids sitting directly in front of the toilet seat, who were somewhat less than thrilled. "Hooray for squishies!" the children shouted. Now, normally, George and Howard's teacher, Miss Ribble, would have been very angry about this particular demonstration speech. She would have yelled on and on about inimitable behaviour and how it's not nice to spray ketchup into people's underwear. But Miss Ribble had changed quite a bit since the last book, and now she was all about fun. "Come on, kids," shouted Miss Ribble. "Let's all run to the cafeteria and grab some ketchup packs. Squishies for everybody!" "Hooray!" cried the children as they bounded from their seats and dashed towards the classroom door. "Not so fast!" shouted Melvin Sneedly, who stood blocking the door with his arms spread defiantly. "You guys are so immature!" Chapter 3. The Combinatron 2000. Melvin Sneedly, the school brainiac, was not about to let anybody leave the classroom until he had given his demonstration speech. "We still have 15 minutes left before lunch," said Melvin, "and that's just enough time for me to demonstrate my new invention, the Combinatron 2000. "Oh, man," whined Melvin's classmates. The children all slumped back into their seats while Melvin pushed a plastic rolling cart to the front of the classroom. On top of the cart were a hamster, a small robot, which Melvin had built himself, and a strange-looking contraption shaped like an ice cream cone. "Today," said Melvin, "I will demonstrate how to turn an ordinary hamster into your very own bionic cyber slave." Melvin placed his pet hamster Sulu at one end of the cart and his tiny homemade robot at the other end. "I shall now combine this ordinary hamster with this tiny robot using the Combinatron 2000. Melvin picked up the Combinatron 2000 and turned it on. A high-pitched tone pierced the classroom air, getting higher and higher in frequency as the machine charged to full power. Melvin typed some last-minute calculations into the keyboard on the side of the Combinatron 2000 as its laser extractor warmed up. Suddenly, two streaks of red glowing light flashed onto Sulu and the tiny robot. The Combinatron 2000 began assimilating information on the two elements. It was about to combine. "Don't worry, kids," said Melvin. "This procedure is totally painless. Sulu won't feel a thing." Finally, a computerized voice started the countdown. "Combining two elements in 5 seconds, combining two elements in 4 seconds, combining two elements in 3 seconds, combining two elements in 2 seconds, combining two elements in 1 second. Blast! A burst of brilliant white light shot out of the Combinatron 2000 and formed a ball of energy between Sulu and the tiny robot. The hamster and the robot began to slide closer and closer together until they disappeared into the energy ball. The smell of burnt matches and pickle relish filled the air as hot blasts of electric wind knocked books off shelves and sent papers flying. Suddenly, there was a blinding flash of light, a quick puff of smoke, and it was all over. Melvin pulled off his goggles. No longer were a hamster and a robot sitting on the cart before him. Now, the hamster and robot were one, combined at a cellular level. The world's first self-contained, warm-blooded, fuzzy bionic cyborg. "Eureka!" shouted Melvin. "It worked! I have created a cybernetic life form!" The children looked on as Melvin waved a metal detector over the hamster, and the reading went off the chart. One of the children raised his hand with a question. "Yes," said Melvin enthusiastically. "Can we go to the lunchroom and get our ketchup packs now?" "But no!" screamed Melvin. "Will you forget about squishies for 1 minute? I've just created the world's first cybernetic hamster, and nobody is leaving this room until I've demonstrated his undying obedience." Chapter 4. Bad Sulu. Sulu didn't seem to know that he'd just undergone a groundbreaking transformation. He didn't act any different. He just wandered across the top of the plastic rolling cart, sniffing everything around him, only stopping occasionally to scratch his ears or rub his whiskers. But poor Sulu was in for a big surprise. "Sulu," said Melvin, "I am your master, and you will obey my commands. I want you to demonstrate your new powers for the class. Do a super bionic jump across the room." Sulu did not respond. "Sulu!" said Melvin sternly. "Crush that plastic rolling cart in your bare paws!" Sulu did not respond. "Sulu!" Melvin shouted. "Go outside, pick up a car, and throw it across the parking lot!" Sulu did not respond. Finally, Melvin reached into his book bag and took out a red ping-pong paddle he had designed especially for this occasion. "Sulu," he said angrily, "do it as I say, or you're going to get a good spanking." This time, Sulu did respond. When he saw the ping-pong paddle, he became very frightened, and his little hamster instincts took over. Sulu jumped into the air, grabbed the ping-pong paddle in his right paw, and then yanked Melvin onto the plastic rolling cart with his left paw. The children finally stopped thinking about ketchup packs and toilets for a moment and settled in to watch the show. Chapter 5. The Incredibly Graphic Violence Chapter, Part 1, in Flipperama. Warning, the following chapter contains graphic depictions of a mean little boy getting spanked by a bionic hamster. While this event is presented for humorous effect, the producers of this book acknowledge that hamster attacks are no laughing matter. If you or someone you love has been the victim of a hamster attack, we strongly urge you to get help by seeking out at a local support group in your area or by visiting www.whenhamstersattack.com. Spanks for the memories. Chapter 6. The Aftermath. Although Sulu hadn't really spanked Melvin very hard, Melvin wailed and blubbered and carried on anyway. "You're a bad hamster," Melvin cried. "I never want to see you again as long as I live." Melvin ran out of the classroom sobbing. The rest of the class, including Miss Ribble, followed him out, laughing and chanting, "Squishy, squishy, squishies." But George and Harold stayed behind to comfort the forgotten hamster. "Don't feel bad, Sulu," said George. "Melvin is a real meanie." "Yeah," said Harold. "Do you want to come home with us? You can live up in our treehouse." Sulu jumped onto Harold's shoulder and licked his face. Then he jumped over to George's shoulder and licked his face too. "I think we've just adopted a bionic hamster," said Harold. So George tucked their new pal into his shirt pocket, and the three friends went off to lunch. Chapter 7. Mr. Krupp. About that very same time, the school principal, Mr. Krupp, came marching into the office in a particularly foul mood. He stopped behind Miss Anthrope's desk, huffing and puffing. "Where's my coffee, Edith?" he shouted. "Get it yourself, Tubby," Miss Anthrope shouted back. "I don't need your lip today, woman," Mr. Krupp growled. "I just want my coffee, and I want it now." "Well, get me a cup too while you're at it," Miss Anthrope growled back. "Ah!" screamed Mr. Krupp in frustration as he grabbed a newspaper and headed for the faculty restroom. Miss Ribble was standing beside the restroom door, smiling and trying very hard not to laugh. "What are you looking at?" Mr. Krupp snarled as he pushed his way past Miss Ribble and slammed the restroom door behind him. Inside the restroom, you could hear the faint sound of a belt buckle jingling, a zipper unzipping, some clothes rustling, and finally, split, split. "What the?" screamed Mr. Krupp from the inside the restroom. "I've got ketchup in my underwear!" In a few moments, the door of the faculty restroom flew open. "I'm going to get George and Harold for this," Mr. Krupp screamed. "They didn't do it," laughed Miss Ribble. "I did. It's called a squishy. It's the latest fad." "Yeah, right. Very funny," said Mr. Krupp. "Now, where are those two kids? I just know they're responsible." As Mr. Krupp headed for the cafeteria, he noticed that he wasn't the only person to fall victim to the dreaded squishies. All through the hallway, angry first, second, third, fifth, and sixth graders were complaining about ketchup stains on their pants, socks, legs, and underwear. Mr. Krupp stormed into the cafeteria and headed for the fourth graders' table. "George and Harold!" shouted Mr. Krupp. "I've got ketchup in my underwear because of you two, and so do half of the kids in the school." "We didn't do it," said Harold. "Yeah," said a few of the other fourth graders. "George and Harold are innocent." "Oh, no, they're not," said a voice from the other end of the table. It was Melvin Sneedley. Besides being the school brainiac, Melvin was also famous for being the school tattletale. "George and Hal taught everybody a trick today, where you put ketchup packs under a toilet seat and make it spray on people's legs," Melvin reported proudly. "Thank you, Melvin," said Mr. Krupp. He turned to George and Harold and pointed at the cafeteria door. "Mr. Beard and Mr. Hutchins, out!" Chapter 8. The comic is mightier than the spitball. George and Harold were sent straight to the detention room. "Man," said Harold, "Melvin is such a tattletale. Somebody ought to teach him a lesson." "And we're just the guys to do it," said George. So George and Harold created an all-new comic book featuring everybody's favourite tattletale and meanie, Melvin Sneedley. When they were done, the two boys sneaked out of the detention room to run off copies of their latest work and sell them in the hallway. The new comic book was a great success. Everybody loved it. Well, everybody but Melvin Sneedley, I should say. As Melvin walked to his last class of the day, he noticed small groups of students in the hallway reading comics together and giggling. Normally, this was enough to make Melvin run straight to the principal's office and tell on everyone for unsupervised reading, which was strictly forbidden. But today, Melvin noticed something strange. The comic reading students were pointing and laughing at him. "What?" said Melvin. "What's wrong? What are you guys looking at?" Melvin looked around the hallway desperately. Everybody was laughing, everybody was pointing, and it was driving Melvin crazy. He marched over to a group of second graders, grabbed the comic book out of their hands, and looked at the cover. Melvin was furious. "You guys are so immature!" shrieked Melvin. He quickly darted off to read the comic in peace, but everywhere he ran, he came across more pointing and more laughing. Finally, Melvin thought of the one place he could read the comic in private. He went into the boys' bathroom, locked himself in one of the stalls, and sat down to read. Splat! Splat! As Melvin sat reading, his legs dripping with ketchup, he began angrier and angrier. "I'm gonna get George and Harold," Melvin vowed. Chapter 9. Captain Underpants and the Terrifying Tale of the Tattletron 2000. Duh! Once upon a time, there was a dumb kid named Melvin Sneedley who was a big tattletale. "I'm telling." Everywhere he went, he caused grief and misery. "I'm telling," until one day a bank robbery was happening. "I'm telling." "Hey, cops, that guy just robbed the bank." "Gee, thanks, kid. You are under arrest." "Hey, kid, you solved the crime of the century." And so he got in the news. Dumb kid is a hero. Everybody loves Melvin. Melvin had become so popular that he decided to run for mayor. "I'm telling." He won in a landslide victory. In another daily news, Dumb Kid becomes mayor. "Congratulations, you're the youngest mayor ever." "Yes, and I'm going to make some big changes." Soon, Mayor Melvin made a bunch of dumb new laws. No humming, no smiling, no talking, no reading signs, no wedgies, no stinky feet, no marveling at nature, no burping, and no stomping in to smell the roses. And people were getting arrested left and right. "You're under arrest." "But I didn't do anything." "Busted." "No saying, but I didn't do anything." And they all got sent to jail. In the man's jail, the lady jail, the kid jail, the baby jail, the dog jail, the cat jail, and the frog jail. But suddenly, "Mayor Melvin, all the jails are full." "I will build a big robo-jail and catch those lawbreakers myself." So he built the Tattletron 2000. Clang, clang. Soon, Mayor Melvin was off catching lawbreakers. "That'll teach you." Ah! Then Melvin headed for the school. Help! The Toweltron 2000 just ran across the soccer field and squished the gym teacher. Oh no, we just planted that grass. This looks like a job for Captain Underpants. What's up, bub? Look out! Help! You're going to jail for busting the roof. But Captain Underpants was faster than a speeding waistband. Hey, where are you going? More powerful than boxer shorts. Hey! And able to leap tall buildings without getting a wedgie. I'm gonna get you. Captain Underpants wanted to fight the robot, but he didn't want to hurt the people inside. Then he got an idea. Hey! What the? Whoa! We're free! Boink, boink, boink. Soon, there was nobody left inside the Toweltron 2000 except for Melvin. Uh-oh! I'm telling! And so, hooray for Captain Underpants! Melvin was put in the jail for dumb kids. You guys are so immature. The end. Treehouse Comics, Inc. Chapter 10. Mad Mr. Melvin. Melvin was furious. He ripped the comic book in half and tossed it over his shoulder. Then he washed his hands in the toilet and stormed out of the restroom. I'm gonna get George and Hal for that, said Melvin. I'm gonna teach them a lesson they'll never forget. After school, Melvin grabbed his Combinatron 2000 and headed home. Melvin's mother and father were both busy working on a top-secret government experiment when Melvin walked in the front door. Hello, son, said Melvin's father. How was your day at school? Terrible, said Melvin. Nobody in school had sufficient respect for my beautiful mind. Those dull-witted, lame-brained, gum-chewing idiots are more impressed with comic books than they are with the wonders of science. But I shall teach them a lesson. I shall teach them all. What's nice, honey? Said Melvin's mum. Melvin marched up to his room to begin building a brand new superpowered robot. But when he opened his bedroom door, he saw the family's pet cat, Dandorella, sleeping quietly on his bed. Hey! Melvin screamed. What are you doing in my room, you stupid cat? You know I'm allergic to you. Now get out of Achoo! Stay out! After a few hours, Melvin had built his newest and most powerful robot ever, which had 3 sets of interchangeable laser eyeballs, matro-hydraulic jumpertronic legs, super-sumbobulating auto arms, and an extendable octoclaw rib cage, and was powered by 3 separate twin-turbo 9000 SP5 Kung Fu titanium lithium alloy processors, which were all built into a virtually indestructible flexogromonic endoskeleton that had the power to punch through cinder blocks, crush steel in its vice-like grasp, and plough mercilessly through poorly written-on sentences. It could also slice bagels. That ought to do the trick, said Melvin, wiping his nose on the tissue. Now all I have to do is... combine my body with this bionic robot, and I shall be the most powerful boy who ever lived. Chapter 11. Melvin's Fantasy. As Melvin set up the Combinatron 2000 and made the proper adjustments, he imagined what his life would be like as the world's first Bionic boy. He imagined himself walking into school the next day, his arms swinging confidently as he crashed through the classroom wall. The girls would swoon as Melvin talked for hours about the amazing world of science. Miss Ribble would probably let Melvin sit at her desk from now on because Melvin's new buns of steel would be too massive to fit into an ordinary children's chair. Maybe Mr. Krupp would invite the governor to visit the school so he could show off his smartest and most powerful student. If so, the governor would probably declare a new holiday, National Melvin Sneedley Day. A day when all kids all over the world would get extra homework and pop quizzes to honor the glorious name of Melvin. But the best part of all would be George and Harold's reaction. They would be so terrified by Melvin's incredible size and strength, they'd drop to their knees and beg for mercy, and Melvin would spare them only if they agreed to be his slaves for all eternity. They'd have to carry his books, sharpen his pencils, and be his personal footstools during each class. Life is gonna... achoo! Rule! Said Melvin. Chapter 12. The Night of the Nasty Nostril Nuggets. Melvin turned on the Combinatron 2000. A high-pitched tone pierced the air, getting higher and higher in frequency as the machine charged to full power. Oops, said Melvin as he quickly turned the dramatic effects setting to off so he wouldn't disturb his parents. Silently, the machine continued to charge as Melvin entered calculations to account for his clothes and glasses. When the laser extractor had finally warmed up, Melvin stepped in front of the Combinatron 2000, standing perfectly still beside his new robot. Suddenly, two streaks of red glowing light flashed onto Melvin and the robot as the Combinatron 2000 began assimilating information on the two elements it was about to combine. Finally, a computerized voice started the countdown. Combining two elements in 5 seconds. Melvin stood perfectly still. Combining two elements in 4 seconds. Melvin's nose began to twitch. Combining two elements in 3 seconds. Suddenly, Melvin felt an uncontrollable urge. He cupped his hands over his mouth and nose as his eyes closed involuntarily. Combining two elements in 2 seconds. Achoo! Melvin looked down into his hands, which were now glistening with mucus-encrusted chunks of semi-dried booglets. Instantly, the Combinatron 2000 began to recalculate the elements in its laser sight, combining 3 elements in 1 second. 3 elements? Melvin screamed in horror. What's the third element? Quickly, Melvin's eyes darted around the room, searching for any element that might have accidentally made its way into the sights of the laser extractor. What's the third element? He screamed again. Then he looked down into his crusty, dripping, phlegm-filled hands. Uh-oh, said Melvin as a blinding burst of white light enveloped him. Bzzz. Chapter 13. The next day. The next day, Melvin didn't show up for school on time. Nobody really seemed to notice, though, because all the children were excited about show and tell. Almost everyone had brought in really lame stuff like books or awards, but George and Harold had something that was totally cool. Everybody remembers Sulu from yesterday, right? Said George. Well, we took him home to live with us in our treehouse, and we taught him the greatest trick, said Harold. The two boys carried Sulu over to the classroom window and opened it up. Harold pulled a large watermelon out of his book bag and showed it to Sulu. Okay, Sulu, said George, show everybody your new trick. In one swift motion, Sulu placed his mouth onto the watermelon and shoved the entire thing into his left cheek. The 4th graders were stunned. No, said Harold. That's not the trick. The trick is what happens next. Sulu looked out the window and eyed a dead tree at the far of the empty playground. Sulu began to chew up the watermelon, then puckered his tiny hamster lips and spat. The watermelon seeds fired out of Sulu's mouth, hitting the target with expert precision. In no time at all, the dead tree at the end of the playground was reduced to a pile of twigs and sawdust. The class cheered as George and Harold petted their amazing little bionic buddy. George and Harold didn't think that anybody could beat their show and tell display, but they were wrong, because at that very moment, Melvin Sneedley was dripping down the hallway towards the classroom door. Melvin hadn't brought anything for show and tell. Melvin was the show and tell. Chapter 14. The unnecessarily disgusting chapter. Notice, the following chapter is extremely gross. To avoid nausea, projectile vomiting, or other gastrointestinal unpleasantries, please refrain from eating for at least 1 hour before reading this chapter. You won't want to eat after reading it, let me assure you. All of the fourth graders were cheering and petting Sulu at the classroom door slowly opened. A greenish, glistening behemoth entered the room, filling the air with the sounds of grinding metal gears and wet, gooey, bursting bubbles. Some of the girls screamed. Ah! Some of the boys did too. Ah! You guys are so immature, said the horrible beast. At once, the children recognised the terrifying creature that stood before them. Melvin? They cried. Yes, it's me, gurgled the wet, jiggling monster angrily. His eyes and nose were dripping with warm, greenish custard like mucus. His robotic arms were caked with massive globs of crispy, shimmering snot. And as he turned to close the classroom door behind him, part of his hand came off on the doorknob. It oozed slowly down the door, leaving behind a chunky trail of moist excretion. Melvin squished and sloshed as he jiggled over to his chair. Each gooey footstep coated the floor with a foamy trail of slime, and everything he touched became wet and encrusted with warm, bubbling, syrupy phlegm. When Melvin sat down, generous helpings of yellowish pudding-like goo slowly dribbled down the chair, collecting into creamy, gelatinous puddles behind him. The puddles themselves were slightly transparent and speckled with thick, shimmering nose hairs and dark red chunks of coagulated blood which— "All right already!" yelled George to the narrator. "Enough with all the descriptions. You're making us all sick." "Thank you, George," said Miss Ribble. "Now, Melvin, why don't you tell us all what happened to you?"
"Well," said Melvin, "I tried to combine myself with your bionic robot last night, but I accidentally sneezed at the last second."
"So you got combined with the robot and Boogers?" asked George.
"Yeah," said Melvin, "but don't worry, I'm building a Supercon 1000, which will reverse the effects and turn me back into a boy again. It'll just take 6 months to finish."
6 months? said Howard.
"Hey, cellular separation is a highly complex procedure," said Melvin. "It's not like building a robot. It takes time."
"You should try taking the batteries out of that combiner thingy and put them in backwards," suggested George. "That might reverse the effect." Melvin rolled his thick, bubbling crust-covered inferno red eyeballs.
"That's the dumbest thing I ever heard,"
he gurgled. Chapter 15. The New Melvin. You might think that turning into a bionic booger boy was the worst thing that could ever happen to a kid. But it wasn't all bad. Believe it or not, there was actually a positive side to being a lumbering, loogie lad. For instance, Melvin now won every football game he played because no one wanted to tackle him. And when he served a volleyball, nobody on the other team would dare to hit the ball back. Besides being the school's new sports star, there were other perks too. Melvin never had to wait in line at the drinking fountain anymore. Now he had his own personal drinking fountain because, well, would you drink from a fountain after a bionic booger boy had globbered all over it? I didn't think so. All of the special attention that Melvin was receiving made some of the other kids a little jealous, but not George and Harold. Considering the many evil villains that George and Harold had been battling all year, the two boys were just grateful that Melvin hadn't turned himself into a gigantic, terrifying beast with plans to destroy the earth. "It could be a lot worse," said Harold. "At least Melvin's not a terrifying evil villain." "Yeah, you're right," said George. "I can't think of anything that could turn Melvin into a terrifying evil villain." Chapter 16. The Cold and Flu Season. Soon it was autumn, and the new season brought it with many changes. Crisp, chilly air, early morning frost, and bright, colourful leaves. But with the beauty of autumn came another change that wasn't quite so welcome. The cold and flu season. All through Jerome Horwitz Elementary School, people were getting sick. The hallways were filled with runny noses, sneezing mouths, and aching bodies. Achoo! and unfortunately one of those noses, mouths and bodies belonged to Melvin Sneedley. Every time Melvin sneezed, thousands of tiny driblets shot out of his mouth, spattering the chalkboard with a thin layer of foamy, glistening yellow-green tapica like mucus. "Don't forget to cover your mouth, Melvin, dear," said Miss Ribble.
"Oh, sorry,"
said Melvin.
"sorry."
He put his hand over his mouth and sneezed again. This time the explosion of air from his stifled sneeze blew off large, wet globs of his body, which sprayed over the entire classroom. It was as if somebody set off a giant firecracker inside a bucket of green paint. The warm, smelly goo smacked into people's hair, splattered onto their clothes, and seemed to drench every square centimetre of the room. "On one second thought, Melvin," said Miss Ribble, "don't cover your mouth next time. Now, who wants a cookie?" Chapter 17. The Field Trip. The next day, for some strange reason, Miss Ribble was off sick with a cold. Mr. Krupp was filling in as the substitute teacher, and, as usual, he was very angry. "What the heck is going on in this room?" he yelled. "What's with all the raincoats and umbrellas?" Then Melvin sneezed. A few months later, Mr. Krupp returned to the classroom with fresh clothes, a raincoat and an umbrella. "All right, everybody," he shouted. "Today is field trip day. Miss Anthrop and I are taking you all to Snotty Bro's tissue factory to see how blow rags are made." The word tissue made Melvin jump.
"No!"
he cried in a panic.
"Me no like tissues!"
An eerie silence fell over the classroom. Everybody looked at Melvin in shock. "Did Melvin just say me no like tissues?" asked Harold. "Yeah," said George. "I've never heard him misuse an object pronoun before. Who does he think he is? Frankenstein?" Chapter 18. Things get bad. In a few hours, the fourth graders were all packed into a hot, stinky factory, listening to a boring speech about how trees are turned into tissues, or something like that. Nobody was paying attention, really, except for Melvin Sneedley, who was terrified. His whole body shook and shimmered as the tour took them down the narrow walkways of the noisy industrial plant. Finally, the tour ended at the gift shop, where the plant manager, Mr. Snoddy, had a surprise for everybody.
"Behind this red curtain with black dots on it," said Mr. Snoddy, "is a free gift for each of you."
Mr. Snoddy pulled back the curtain to reveal a pile of Sampy's tissues packs.
"Help yourselves,"
said Mr. Snoddy.
"There's enough for everybody."
"No!" screamed Melvin.
"Me no like tissues!"
"Oh, don't be silly," said Mr. Snoddy.
"Everybody loves tissues, and our tissues are extra absorbent. They really help to wipe out phlegm and mucus."
"No!" screamed Melvin again.
"Tissues is bad magic."
"Nonsense," laughed Mr. Snoddy. He tossed a couple of sample tissue packs at Melvin. "Here you go, young man," he said. "Enjoy." The tissue packs flipped through the air and stuck onto Melvin's back. Melvin screamed. His eyes began to glow green as he beat his chest in anger. Suddenly, Melvin's shoulders started to bubble. His chest expanded. The flexognomonic steel in Melvin's endoskeleton flexed and grew. His neck and head widened, and his body swelled to a height of 4 meters. Melvin grabbed the tissue packs in his massive, dripping fingers and flung them to the ground.
"Don't make me angry,"
Melvin warned.
"You no like me when I'm angry."
"Oops," said Mr. Snoddy. "You dropped your tissue packs, young fellow. Here's some more for you." Mr. Snoddy grabbed 2 giant handfuls of sample tissue packs and tossed them at Melvin. Chapter 19. Things get badder. Frantically, Melvin swatted at the 9 new tissue packs stuck to his upper torso as if they were a swarm of stinging bumblebees. He stomped his giant spiked feet and thrashed about violently as his hulking body doubled, then tripled in size. Melvin kicked and punched the walls of the gift shop as he let out a terrifying, blood-curdling cry.
There's no need to cry, little man, said Mr. Snoddy. Here, have some more tissues to dry those tears.
He tossed several more samples tissue packs at Melvin. As you might have noticed by now, Mr. Snoddy was not exactly the brightest bulb on the Hanako tree. What happened next could only be described as chaos. Once again, Melvin's massive body tripled in size. By now, Melvin was roaring and kicking and knocking over giant machines. Children screamed and ran. Mr. Snoddy thought it might help matters if he could just give Melvin some more tissues. But before he could, a drop of mucus the size of a bathtub dripped from Melvin's massive nose and splashed down onto Mr. Snoddy, gluing him to the floor. George and Howard hid behind the red curtain with black dots on it as Melvin crashed through the roof of the factory. Ear-piercing roars bellowed out of his gigantic, oozing mouth as he kicked down the walls of the factory and tossed heavy machinery into the parking lot. Mr. Krupp and Miss Anthrope tried their best to get the situation under control, but they weren't having much luck.
Hey, Bob, shouted Mr. Krupp. I've had just about enough of your shenanigans.
You're gonna be spending the afternoon in detention if you don't settle down, young man, shouted Miss Anthrope. Suddenly, Melvin reached out and grabbed Miss Anthrope in his massive metal fist. Help me! She screamed. Somebody save me!
Said Miss Krupp nervously. I'll go get some help.
Mr. Krupp ran and hid with George and Howard behind the red curtain with black dots on it. Hey, I thought you said you were going to get help, said Howard.
Well, not today, said Mr. Krupp.
You know, said George, there's only one person who can save Miss Anthrope right now.
Who's that? Asked Mr. Krupp.
Chapter 20. Captain Underpants, that's who. As much as George and Howard hated to do it, they decided that it was time to send in Captain Underpants to save the day. George snapped his fingers. Suddenly, the terror and panic that Mr. Krupp had been experiencing completely vanished. A wild, silly grin spread across his face as he leaped to his feet and ripped off his outer clothing and toupee. Mr. Krupp's transformation into Captain Underpants was almost complete. The only thing he was missing was a cape. Gee, he said, I sure wish I could find the red curtain with black dots on it. Hey, said George as he pointed to the red curtain with black dots on it. Here's a red curtain with black dots on it.
What a remarkably unexpected coincidence, said Captain Underpants as he grabbed the latest in a series of convoluted plot devices and tied it around his neck. By this time, Melvin had stomped his way out of the factory and entered the downtown area, leaving behind a twisted path of mucus, co-destruction. Captain Underpants flew into the air, following the trail of terror until he was face to face with the snot-spewing cyborg. I order you to stop, said Captain Underpants, in the name of all that is pre-shrunk and cottony. Melvin did not listen. Captain Underpants had no choice but to fight the boogery behemoth, but first he needed to save Miss Anthrope. Quickly, our hero flew to Edith's side, grabbed her hands, and pulled firmly. The slimy phlegm that covered Melvin's gigantic fist was strong and gluey, but it was no match for wedgie power. Captain Underpants pulled and pulled until Miss Anthrope became completely dislodged with a noisy, wet, disgusting sound. Note, please feel free to make the noisy, wet, disgusting sound of your choice to emphasise the intense drama of this gripping paragraph. I'm free! Cried Miss Anthrope. Let's get the heck out of here! Suddenly, the Bionic Booger Boy reached down and grabbed Captain Underpants by the cape. The monster held on tightly with his gigantic, gooey, robotic fingers. Ark! Cried Captain Underpants. He's got my cape! He's got my cape! Well, just untie it! Screamed Miss Anthrope. Let's go! Let's go! But I can't fight crime without my cape! Cried Captain Underpants. Forget your stupid cape! Edith screamed. Just save me, you idiot!
Chapter 21. You can't have your cape and Edith too. As anybody will tell you, no superhero is complete without a cape. I mean, without a cape, a superhero is just a guy wearing fancy underwear, or in this case, not so fancy underwear. But Captain Underpants knew what he had to be done. He reached up with his free hand and courageously untied his cape, valiantly sacrificing his atheistic integrity to save the life of a mere mortal being. Captain Underpants and Miss Anthrope were now free, but they weren't safe yet. The Bionic Booger Boy swung at our hero with all his might. Captain Underpants weaved around Melvin's frantic, flying, flinging fists as he tried to find a safe place to land. Suddenly, Captain Underpants' 100% cotton-powered vision spotted George and Harold miles away. With lightning speed, he flew down to meet the boys. "George and Harold," said Captain Underpants, "you've got to keep this woman safe while I destroy that robotic slime ball." "Okay," said Harold, "but hurry up. Here he comes." "Wait," cried Miss Anthrope. I didn't get a chance to say thank you." She turned and kissed Captain Underpants all over his face with wet, drooly smooches. Thank you, she said between each sloppy kiss. Yuck, said Harold. "I sure hope she doesn't thank us," said George. When Miss Anthrope had finished slobbering all over Captain Underpants' face, she gave him a great big hug for good luck. "Now go get him, Tiger," she said coolly. But Captain Underpants didn't move. He just stood there staring blankly into space. Off in the distance, George and Harold could hear the Bionic Booger Boy approaching. Each thundering footstep brought the horrible beast closer and closer, until at last he stood towering above them, panting heavily and dripping profanely. Miss Anthrope screamed and ran away. "Ah! Hurry, Captain Underpants!" cried Harold. "Do something!" "Yeah!" cried George. "Kick his backside! Kick his backside!" But Captain Underpants didn't move. He didn't fight. He didn't fly. He didn't kick anybody's backside. In fact, the only thing he did do was get very, very angry. "What the heck is going on here, Bubs?" he screamed. "And why am I standing here in my underwear?" George and Harold didn't like the sound of that. Chapter 22. Welcome back, Crupper. If you read the comic on page 7 of this novel, then you know what happens whenever Captain Underpants gets water on his head. Unfortunately, Miss Anthrope's wet, slobbery kisses had produced the same effect. Captain Underpants had been turned back into Mr. Krupp, and now he was about to be turned into lunch. Quickly, George and Harold began frantically snapping their fingers. Snap, 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 snap. Again and again they snapped, but Mr. Krupp's face was still slimy and wet with gooey kiss juice, and all the snaps were having no effect at all. The mighty mucus monster shoved Mr. Krupp into his gummy mouth and swallowed him whole. And then he came after George and Harold. "Help!" screamed George. "We're doomed!" screamed Harold. Chapter 23. Sulu saves the day. Halfway across the sea, a plucky little hamster with bionic ears heard the terrified cries of his two best pals. Quickly, Sulu jumped out of his exercise wheel and crashed through the side of his plastic cage. Then, with a mighty leap, he bounded from the window of George and Harold's treehouse. At that very moment, Melvin was dangling George and Harold high above his mouth. "Ha, ha, ha!" laughed the Bionic Booger Boy. "We got you at last!" "Well, goodbye, Harold," said George. "See you later, pal," said Harold. "It was fun while it lasted." Finally, Melvin let go of George and Harold. "Ah!" The two boys screamed as they fell face first into the gooey, gaping mouth of the swoosh. The next thing George and Harold knew, they were flying sideways at the incredible speed. Everything around them was a blur of motion, except for the sight of their little buddy Sulu, who had literally grabbed them from the murky mouth of death at the very last second. "Atta boy!" cried George. "Hooray for Sulu!" cried Harold. Sulu set George and Hal down on the roof of a distant building, then returned to the scene of the crime. He grabbed a few oversized novelty items from the top of some warehouses and turned to face his mortal enemy. Chapter 24. The incredibly graphic violence chapter part 2 in Flipperama. Warning, the following stunts were performed on an enclosed street by a highly trained professional hamster. To avoid injury, please do not grab oversized novelty items from the top of warehouses and beat up giant monsters with them. Cane tops keep falling on my head. Yummy, yummy, I got glove in my tummy. It's been a hard day's bite. Chapter 25. How to reverse the effects of a Combinatron 2000 in one easy step. The Bionic Booger Boy was defeated. He flopped unconscious into a giant boogery blob that spread across several city blocks. And nearly 4 whole pages as reporters surrounded his massive oozing body. Soon, Melvin's mother and father showed up with the Combinatron 2000.
"We saw what was happening on the news," they said, "and we want the world to know that we were going to create a new machine that will reverse the process that turned our son into this monster. If we work together, it should only take a few months to build."
"Why don't you guys just take the batteries out of that combiner thingy and switch them around?" said George. "Won't that reverse the machine's effects?"
"Well," laughed Melvin's father, "obviously you don't know anything about science, little boy. You can't expect to reverse the effect of a highly complex cellular modularizing combinatron just by switching the batteries around. That type of thing only happens in obnoxious children's books."
said George self-unconsciously. "Well, why don't you just give it a try anyway?"
"All right,"
said Mr. Sneedley, rolling his eyes and smirking. He quickly switched the batteries around and powered up the machine.
"But I'm only doing this to prove a point to you kids. It's not going to work. No way. Not in a million years. And anybody who thinks it's a complete idiot. It's going against all the popular laws of logic and science."
He aimed the newly reconfigured Combinatron 2000 at his son and fired. Chapter 26. Bzzz! Suddenly, there was a terrific explosion. The Bionic Booger Boy burst into 3 huge chunks of glistening snot and twisted metal, which smacked onto 3 nearby buildings and stuck like glue. In the centre of the explosion, surrounded by smoke, stood Mr. Krupp and Melvin.
"Well, what do you know?" said Mr. Sneedley. "My idea worked."
George and Hal rolled their eyes.
"Now, step aside, kiddies,"
said Mr. Sneedley as the 2 scientists marched off to tell the reporters all about their brilliant and inspirational scientific breakthrough. But as the smoke around Mr. Krupp and Melvin began to clear, it became obvious and they were not quite back to normal. Apparently, the newly configured Combinatron 2000 had accidentally morphed Mr. Krupp and Melvin together.
Don't worry," Mr. Sneedley told the reporters. "All I need to do is zap them one more time. That will set everything straight."
He fired up the Combinatron 2000 again and prepared to blast away.
"I sure
hope this separates their bodies," said George. "Me too," said Harold. Bzzz. Chapter 27. To make a long story short, it did. Chapter 28. A happy ending. "You know something?" said George. "This is the first time one of our books actually had a happy ending." "You're right," said Harold. "Usually they end with screaming, 'Oh no,' and me screaming, 'Here we go again.' But we got lucky this time, I guess." "What do you mean, lucky?" said Mr. Krupp. "It was my invention that saved the world. You guys are so immature." "Huh?" said George.
I want to see you both of you bobs in my office pronto, yelled Melvin. I'm gonna punch you boys so bad you kids will be born with detentions. What?
said Harold. Suddenly, a giant expendable octoclaw reached out from one of the three huge chunks of boogers. It grabbed the Combinatron 2000 and out of Mr. Sneedley's hands and smashed it into smithereens on the ground. Mr. and Mrs. Sneedley ran away screaming as the three humongous robotic booger chunks came to life. Slowly, they began dripping down the sides of the buildings, each one of energizing itself with a single twin-turbo 9000 SP5 Kung Fu titanium lithium alloy processor. As the huge booger chunks oozed closer and closer, they began sprouting strange-looking metallic eyeballs and huge menacing robotic limbs. Suddenly, the three ridiculous robo-boogers leaped towards Jordan Harold, Sulu, Mr. Krupp, and Melvin. And the chase was on. "Oh no!" screamed Harold. "Here we go again!" screamed Harold. However, don't miss out on the next part. Captain Underpants and the Big Bad Battle of the Bionic Booger Boy Part 2. The Revenge of the Ridiculous Robo-Boogers. Coming soon.